Alien teacher laughed at killing humans. Earth girl shut him down before he. The air on Valith 9 tasted like recycled metal and the absence of rain. Selith Tyre was standing at her pod assignment screen when the name processed. She read it twice. Then she read the origin tag below it and stood very still for a moment, the way prey animals go still before they decide which direction to run. Earth. The assignment was real. She had been told she would share a dormitory with a human. She had decided not to believe it. The Academy's placement system handled thousands of students per cycle and made errors. She had filed it in the category of things that would resolve themselves. The door opened. The human was shorter than Selith had imagined, shorter than anyone she had seen on this level, shorter than the cleaning units that ran the floor seams. Dark hair, dark eyes, a single bag carried over one shoulder. She moved quietly without announcing herself, the way things move when they have spent a long time in places where being heard first is a disadvantage. She did not look at Selith when she entered. She looked at the room, both exits, the environmental panel, the viewport. Then she looked at Selith. Kira Vasquez, she said, not a greeting, a fact. Selith Tyre, Selith's bioluminescent patches, 4 of them, running along her neck from jaw to collarbone, shifted from their resting blue to an uncertain yellow-green. She could not stop them. She never could. I thought they were joking, she said, about the room. Kira said, I am real, and put her bag down and began to unpack. She had very little: clothes, a data pad with a cracked edge, a worn leather bracelet that looked like it had been repaired 3 times in 3 different places with 3 different colors of thread, and a holographic projector, small, the kind that sits on a flat surface, which she placed on the shelf above her pod without ceremony. She pressed the activation point. The image came up, a woman in military armor, close-cropped hair, a tired smile, alive in the way people look before the worst thing happens to them. The photo had clearly been taken in a hurry, the framing slightly off-center, the light catching one side of her face and leaving the other in shadow. Selith looked at Kira's face when she looked at it. She decided not to ask. The orientation session filled the grand hall with sound and species. Selith found Kira in the crowd by the simple method of looking for the shortest person with the most watchful eyes. Director Havel Seni stood at the podium and welcomed the new cohort of the Galactic Concord Academy, Station Valith 9, in 4 languages. She named the species in attendance by their classification rank. She said the word accommodate when she reached the lower-tier designations. She did not say anyone's name. She said the Academy would accommodate students whose worlds did not meet the standard combat classification threshold in recognition of the diversity of the conquered territories. Kira's expression did not change. She was already looking at the exits. That first week, Selith watched her map the station. Not obviously, not with a data pad or a marking tool. She simply walked, and when she came back to the dormitory, she knew things. She knew which corridors narrowed. She knew where the environmental control access points were. She knew the transit time between every docking bay and the central amphitheater. Have you been to stations like this before? Selith asked. No, Kira said. She was reading a SciFi anatomy text, the technical one, not the public version. Selith did not ask where she had obtained it. On the 3rd day, in a junction corridor near the East Training Wing, a SciFi student, a 2nd year, large even by SciFi measure, throat markings and unearned bright gold, put his shoulder into Kira as he passed. Not an accident. The kind of contact that has a name on every world, in every species language, because it has been in use since before any of them invented the word for it. She stumbled, caught the wall, straightened. She did not say anything. She did not look at him. She walked on. Selith's patches flared briefly orange before she controlled them. Kira did not see it. She was already around the corner. Selith had been warned about Instructor Vierkelzer on her first day by a 3rd-year Vanny who described him the way experienced travelers describe a particular stretch of road, not with fear, but with the specific careful language of someone who has seen what it does to people who are not careful. The morning before combat theory, she found Kira in the dormitory corridor outside their door, stretching. The angles were slightly alarming. Human joints moved in directions Selith had not anticipated. Kelza runs combat theory, Selith said. I know, Kira straightened. She rolled her wrist once, a habitual motion. He has 9 consecutive championship titles in full contact demonstration. He has held more instructional positions than anyone at this rank in the Academy's history. He is, Selith searched for the word that would land accurately. He is not kind about species he considers decorative. Kira looked at her for a moment. Her expression was neutral, but something in her voice, when she answered, made Selith's patches go briefly still, a color between yellow and gray she did not have a name for. I know, Kira said. Selith did not ask more. The lecture hall seated 400. Holographic displays flanked the instructor's platform on both sides. When Via Kelza entered, the room adjusted, that particular shift in collective posture that happens when something large and certain of itself walks in. He was Seathani, which meant he was built to be noticed, 2 meters plus, kitten plating across his shoulders and chest that caught the light like polished stone, throat markings, a deep satisfied gold. He had the walk of a creature who had never been surprised by anything and intended to keep that record. He placed a data slate on the podium without looking at it. He began with the species hierarchy. He moved through it like a man recounting an established geography, the Gorith, their raw physical capacity, the Vayani, their neural processing speed, the Seathani, their combat record across 12 systems, their unbroken chain of military achievement from the first conquest to the current expansion. He praised each tier with the comfortable authority of someone who had arranged the furniture himself and saw no reason to rearrange it. Then he reached the lower classifications. His voice did not change. That was the part that was hardest to listen to. There was no contempt sharpened to a point. There was just the flat, easy tone of someone describing things that did not require emphasis because their smallness was self-evident. He pulled up the display for Earth. The planet hung in holographic blue above his right shoulder, small, green-blue, spinning with the mild indifference of something that does not know it is being discussed. Humans, Kelza said. He let the word sit alone for a moment. Impressive in the way a disease is impressive, hard to kill, but ultimately insignificant. A sound moved through the room. Not quite laughter, something that wanted to be laughter and was on its way there. He brought up combat footage, a border outpost, partial structure, smoke, debris, Seathani assault team moving efficiently through a held position, wave by wave. He watched it the way a person watches footage they have seen many times and still enjoy. Outpost Meridian 7, he said, Northern Front engagement. You may have read about it in your history modules if you chose to read about it. The tone implied he would not have. My unit spent 8 hours at that position. He smiled slightly. 8 hours on a world like that, in weather like that, against an opponent like that, is less a campaign than a rest stop. More laughter this time, real laughter. Kira was sitting 12 rows up, slightly left of center. Selith was beside her. She had been watching Kira's hands since the footage appeared on the display. They were still, completely still. In a way, hands are not usually still, because alive things move without thinking about it, and to be that still means you are thinking about it very hard. The footage ran. Kelza talked over it. He named the defending forces' failures as a list. He used the word futile 3 times in one paragraph without noticing. He zoomed the display to a section of the outpost's eastern perimeter, a section of wall held longer than the rest, with a higher density of Seathani casualties clustered at its base. This section took longer to clear, he said, and his voice had the mild puzzlement of a man unsatisfied by an otherwise smooth meal. Terrain advantage, poor formation discipline on our initial approach. He moved on. Selith felt it before she understood it. Her patches shifted, a deep involuntary amber, the color she associated with being in a room where something was about to break and could not be stopped. Kelza looked up from the display and let his gaze move across the room in the slow way of someone inviting a particular kind of attention. Any questions? Any comments from our, he paused, diverse cohort on the strategic philosophy of engagement against a Class 3 world? He was looking at Kira when he said diverse. The room knew where he was looking. 400 students turned, at slightly different speeds, toward the same spot. Kira stood up. The laughter that started was not mean, exactly. It was the laughter of an audience that has been set up for a joke and recognizes the punchline arriving. A girl in a training issue shirt, smaller than anyone in the room, standing up to answer an instructor who had just called her world decorative. The laughter built for 3 full seconds. She waited. It stopped. Which outpost? She said, not a question. Kelza's markings held their gold. Excuse me. Meridian 7, which assault wave? He held still for a moment. The room held still with him. 3rd wave, 2nd day. 3rd wave, 2nd day, she nodded once, as if confirming something she had already known. 109 Cthani casualties across the eastern section before the wall fell. Commander Elena Vasquez, rank colonel, holding force. She held for 7 hours before the position was overrun. She killed 39 soldiers in that section before she went down. She paused. She did not break easily. The room was very quiet. She was my mother. Kelza's throat markings flickered. Gold, then something beneath the gold, a darker color just for a moment, then gold again. He produced a sound that was technically a laugh. He said something about sentiment. He said that grief was understandable but not a substitute for strategic analysis. His voice was slightly louder than it had been a moment ago, his gestures slightly bigger. He was filling a space that had suddenly become too large for him. He turned back to the display. Kira sat down. Selith's patches blazed white for 2 seconds, pure unfiltered white, the color of voltage, the color she had only read about in her own biology texts, the one that meant her body had received information it was not ready for. She pressed her hands together in her lap to keep them from shaking. She looked at Kira. Kira was watching the display again. Her hands were still. Selith realized, with the slow comprehension of something that should have been obvious, the hands had been still since the footage appeared, since Kelza said Meridian 7, before the question, before the answer, before any of it. She had already known. She had known before she walked into the room. What Kira Vasquez knew about Via Kelza before she ever sat in his classroom could fill a data card. What he knew about her could fit in the pause he took before he forced that laugh, brief, reflexive, covering something he would not name for another 6 weeks. I did not understand that yet. I was still watching her hands. Stay close. It takes time to learn what stillness means on something built the way she was built. The exam results came back 3 days later. Kelza posted them on the shared board at the end of the week, the way he always did, with the scores listed without comment. His silence was the comment. Kira had scored 98 on the tactical theory component. He had deducted 2 points for insufficient source citation on secondary conclusions. The deduction put her 3rd in the cohort, behind a Gorith and a Cthani whose scores he had not annotated at all. She did not say anything about it. She scored 96 on the environmental assessment module. He deducted 4 points for unconventional terminology. She was still 2nd overall. She scored 100 on the command structure analysis. He had nothing to deduct. Her name sat at the top of the board for 6 days before the next module opened. He stopped calling on her in class after the 3rd week. Not dramatically, no announcement, no obvious pivot. He simply stopped directing questions toward her section of the hall. His gaze moved across the room and skipped the rows where she sat, the way water moves around a stone. Students noticed. They notice the way they notice when a teacher adjusts their behavior and hopes no one will mention it. Selith mentioned it to Kira alone in the dormitory at night. He is avoiding you. He is recalculating, Kira said. She was reading. The Cthani text was gone, replaced by something in a language Selith did not recognize. It means I have taken 1 weapon from him. There are more weapons. Yes, she turned a page. That is why I am reading. Selith lay back on her pod, and looked at the ceiling and tried to identify the specific feeling in her chest. It was not quite fear. It was the sensation of watching someone move through a room and realizing, too late, that they have been counting the exits since they arrived. The physical assessment came in the 4th week. The academy ran them in the secondary training bay, a wide space with adjustable gravity plating in the floor and atmosphere controls that could shift oxygen content, humidity, and pressure independently. The SciFi students walked in like they owned it. They had every reason to. They trained in conditions like this from early childhood. The endurance run was 5 kilometers, varying gravity along the course, sections at 0.8 standard, sections at 1.3. Atmosphere shifted twice mid-run, once dropping the oxygen content by 12% for a 400-meter stretch. The monitoring instructor, a Vayani named Dorvak, stone-gray skin, eyes the color of deep water, a gentleness in his movement that did not match his size, explained the course parameters, and stood at the finish line with a recording slate. SciFi students finished in clusters. The fastest hit 11 minutes. Most were done by 12. They stood at the finish, breathing hard, mandibles clicking in the way Selith had learned meant approval of self. Kira finished at 14 minutes. The clicking turned to something else. Not quite laughter, SciFi mandible humor was more complicated than that, but the sound of an audience that had confirmed what it expected. She kept running. Not fast, not dramatic. She turned at the finish line and went back onto the course with the even mechanical stride of something that has not yet decided it is done. The monitoring instructor looked up from his slate. She ran the course again. The SciFi students stopped clicking. She ran it a 3rd time. The monitoring instructor had put his slate down entirely and was now watching her the way Selith had learned to watch things on this station, carefully, without expression, storing information for later. At the 2-hour mark, the instructor asked her to stop. Regulations capped assessment time for liability purposes. Her heart rate was elevated. Her forehead was damp, that specific cooling mechanism that Selith had read about in the biology module and not quite believed, the body producing its own water to shed excess heat, which was either brilliant or deeply alarming depending on how you thought about the relationship between a living system and the idea of being wet on purpose. She stopped. She stretched. She walked to the water station. The SciFi students were still standing at the finish line. They were not clicking. Dorvak ran the strength assessment the following day. He noted everything in careful shorthand on his slate, the way people take notes when they have made a decision to write an accurate record of something and are not sure how it will be received later. Kira matched the mid-tier Gorith in grip strength. The testing device ran its output twice because the first read seemed improbable. The second read confirmed it. Dorvak looked at the device, looked at her hand, made a note. Interesting, he said, not a compliment, not a dismissal, the word of someone who has added a piece to something they are still building. The environmental simulation module ran in the 5th week. The training bay's atmosphere controls could push a controlled environment to the limits of what different species could tolerate. Instructors used it to test adaptive capacity, which was a polite way of describing a room that was slowly becoming uninhabitable while a student was inside it. The session was open to the full cohort, observers in the gallery above. Kelza was not running this module. A Vani instructor named Perith held the controls, a small careful creature who ran everything by the manual and kept excellent records. Oxygen content dropped in stages. Standard was 21%. By the time it reached 14, the Vayani students were showing minor physiological stress markers. By 10, 2 Gorith had tapped out. By 9, most of the room was focused on managing their own biology. The counter read 7%. Kira shrugged. Not elaborately, just the small movement of someone in a meeting who has been asked about something they find unremarkable. She looked at the readout, looked at Perith through the observation window, and shrugged. Perith stopped the test. She crossed the room to the external console and reset it. She ran the calibration check twice. Then she looked up at the gallery where Dorvac was standing with his slate and made a gesture Selith did not know the vanny meaning of but could guess. Afterward, Perth found Kira in the corridor outside the training bay. How, Perth said, one word, in the direct way of someone who has given up on preamble. We climb mountains, Kira said. High ones, humans have been doing it for thousands of years. The air up there is less than that. Perth went very still, for sport. Kira considered, sometimes for sport, sometimes just to see what is at the top. Perth looked at her for a long moment. Then she went back to her office, and Selith later learned she had spent 4 hours reading about mountains, what they were, how high the largest ones went, and what percentage of the atmosphere existed at their peaks. When she finished, she sent Dorvac a message with no text, only an attached file, the atmospheric readings for a place called Everest. Dorvac's response came back in 40 seconds. It contained one word, confirmed. Selith found Kira in the academy library the following evening. She was at a corner table, back to the wall, facing both reading room exits. The holographic display above her table showed a gory skeletal diagram, musculature overlays, joint stress ratings, the bright green annotations of a xenobiology database she had somehow obtained guest access to. She closed it when Selith sat down, not quickly, not guiltily, just closed it, the way you close something when you are done with it. Dorvac was there already, at the table's other end, a data pad face down in front of him. He had the careful stillness of someone who has been waiting without wanting to appear like he has been waiting. I have been reading about your hunting techniques, he said, the persistence method. Which part? Kira asked. The part where you chase something until it falls over, he said it plainly. I had to reread it several times. The principle is you pursue a prey animal not at speed sufficient to catch it, but at speed sufficient to prevent rest. For hours, for days, in some recorded cases, until the animal's body simply gives out. That is the core of it, Kira said. Animals on your world have evolved fear responses to running water, to specific smells, to darkness, to sounds. They have not evolved a fear response to being followed, because nothing on your world ever followed them long enough to matter. He paused. Until you. Kira was quiet for a moment. We started slow, she said. We were not fast. We were not strong. We did not have armor or venom or natural weapons. We had legs that did not tire quickly and a cooling system that worked better than anything else alive. We learned to use what we had. Dorvac looked at her for a long time. That, he said, is the most terrifying thing I have ever heard. She almost smiled. We are very patient, she said. Selith's patches had been shifting, slowly and without her attention, from their resting blue to a deep electric green, the color she associated with awe, the color she had mostly experienced in the presence of things much larger than herself. She looked down at her own neck and was briefly startled. Dorvac saw it. His expression did not change, but something in it settled, like a door that has been standing slightly open, moving to fully open. He picked up his data pad and left without a farewell, which in Gorith culture, Selith knew, was not rudeness. It was the gesture of someone who has what they came for. She did not see it coming, the corridor confrontation. That was Selith's honest accounting of it later, when she replayed the week in her memory looking for signs she should have read. She could find them in retrospect, the way Kelzer's classroom energy had been shifting for days, his demonstrations growing more elaborate, his manner toward the upper cohort louder and more performative, the specific way his markings pulsed gold when he spoke, like something building pressure behind a sealed door. She was walking 3 meters behind Kira in the East Junction corridor when it happened. Kelzer was coming from the opposite direction, not by accident. No one who held his position arrived anywhere by accident. His markings were red, not the orange red of irritation, the deep red that Cthani biology ran when something has decided it needs to establish something. He stopped in the center of the corridor. He did not move to the side. He was the corridor. Kira walked toward him and stopped 2 meters away. She had to look up to see his face. The geometry of it was almost strange. The top of her head was below his shoulder line. "You think you have proven something," Kelsa said. His voice was low and even, which was worse than if it had been loud. "You have not. A simulation is not war. An assessment is not a battlefield. You run a course and you breathe thin air and you move weight, and you think this tells the galaxy something about what you are." He leaned forward slightly. "It tells the galaxy that you are persistent, like a weed, like a low-grade infection, nothing that requires respect." Kira looked at him. She did not step back. She did not look away. She studied him the way she studied the skeletal diagrams, the same quality of attention, precise, cataloging without heat. "I know exactly what you have done, instructor," she said. "I know where you fought. I know with which wave. I know what you did to the medical personnel at Outpost Shy before the conquest terms were filed." She held his gaze. "I have known since the first week." The color in his markings shifted, red to something deeper, something that was not quite a color Selith had a name for. "You should be careful," he said. "I am always careful," Kira said. She stepped around him and walked away. Kelsa stood in the empty corridor. His markings cycled through 3 colors in 4 seconds, which Selith's biology text had described as involuntary, the body's signaling system moving faster than conscious control. He did not look like a man who had won an argument. He did not look like a man who had lost one. He looked like a man who has just discovered that the room he thought he was standing in has a different shape than he believed. He stood there for a long moment. Then he walked away in the opposite direction. Selith found she had been holding all 4 of her hands pressed together in front of her chest, a posture she recognized from her childhood, from the specific moments when something large and out of control was very close. She had not moved during any of it. She went after Kira. "He knows," Selith said. She caught up in the junction where the east corridor opened to the dormitory wing. "About Shy, he knows you know." "Yes," Kira said. "He will not let that sit." "No," Kira said, "he will not." Selith walked beside her. The corridor lights ran at partial power this late, a warm amber that caught the edge of things and left the rest in shadow. "What does that mean for?" "It means we are at the part I planned for," Kira said. She was not looking at Selith. She was looking ahead at the corridor, the way she always looked at rooms, counting what she needed to count, marking what she needed to mark. "Everything until now was the part I did not plan for, the part I just had to get through." Selith stopped walking. She stood alone in the amber corridor light and watched Kira move away from her, steady and unhurried, and felt her patches shift to a color she had never experienced before in her own body. Not quite white, not quite gold, something between them, something she did not yet have a name for. She thought, "I decided not to ask," the night she arrived. "I saw her face when she looked at the photo, and I decided not to ask." She thought, "I should have asked." She was already awake when Selith's alarm sounded. She was on the floor beside her pod, working through a stretch sequence, joints moving at angles that had stopped alarming Selith 3 weeks ago and simply became part of the room's particular geometry. The morning light through the viewport was the pale white of recycled station illumination, the kind that gives everything a slightly clinical edge, and Kira moved through it without hurry, without urgency, like someone with hours ahead of them and nothing to prove about how they spent it. Selith sat up. Her patches were already a dim alert yellow, which was her body's way of telling her something before her mind caught up. "Today," she said. "Today," Kira confirmed. She stood, rolled her wrist once, the habitual motion, left then right. Then she sat on the edge of her pod and looked at Selith with the particular directness she used when she was about to say something she had been organizing for a while. "I want to tell you something before." Selith waited. Cthani binocular processing has a 0.3-second lag on lateral movement below chest height. She said it the way she said everything, flat, measured like a report. Cold degrades their joint flexibility. Below 18 degrees, the loss is around 40% across the major strike joints. The amphitheater runs at 16. She paused. He chose that room. He set the temperature himself 2 years ago because he preferred it. He did not know it would matter. Selith looked at her. "You have known all of this." Since the third week. And you waited. I needed him to make the challenge public. She reached for the leather bracelet on the shelf, worn, repaired in 3 places, 3 colors of thread. She put it on. I needed it to be on record in the amphitheater, in front of the cameras. Anything less and it is just a fight. She looked at Selith steadily. I did not come here for a fight. Selith's patches went to a deep and complicated green. He weighs 200 kg more than you, Selith said. Her voice was not quite even. His kitten stops blade strikes. His reaction time is nearly twice yours. He has fought and killed across 12 systems. He has never lost a recorded match. He is going to try to hurt you, Kira. He has full contact authority. Medical teams do not intervene until life threshold. Kira nodded once. She had known all of this. Of course she had known all of this. Then why? Selith asked. The word came out smaller than she intended. Kira was quiet for a moment. She looked at the shelf, the bracelet now on her wrist, the holographic projector dark in the morning light. She held for 7 hours, she said, 39 soldiers before the wall fell, 32 people behind her holding with her, all of them gone. She was not supposed to win. She was supposed to buy time, and she did it, and she paid what it cost. She looked at her hands. I am not here to win. I am here to make it permanent. She looked up. He has been telling that story for years. He called it a rest stop. He called my mother's death and the deaths of everyone with her an inconvenience. I am going to put a different version of it on record, in the amphitheater, on the cameras, so that no one, anywhere, ever gets to call it a rest stop again. Selith crossed the room. She sat beside her on the pod and put all 4 arms around her, the angles still slightly wrong, and Kira leaned into it for 3 seconds, which was the longest Selith had seen her lean into anything. Then she straightened, picked up her data card from the shelf. I have been ready for 6 weeks, she said. Dorvac was in the doorway. He had not knocked. He was a large creature, and he had a quality of stillness that made it easy to not notice him until you did. He looked at Kira. Something in his expression had the settled quality of a long calculation reaching its final line. Persistence predator, he said quietly. Kira looked at him. Yes. He nodded once. He did not say anything else. He stepped back from the doorway and let them pass. The grand amphitheater held just over 3,000. It was full. Not because the schedule had announced something unusual. It listed a standard advanced demonstration session, which drew moderate interest on a normal week. But word moves on a station like Valith 9 the way air moves, through every corridor, under every door, filling the space between what is official and what is true. By the time the doors opened, every seat was taken. Students who could not find seats stood in the upper gallery. 2 conquered officials occupied the dignitary section on the east tier, with a monitoring officer standing at the aisle end of their row, a recording slate held at a formal angle. Holographic cameras floated above the arena floor, 6 of them, the standard broadcast array. Whatever happened here would be archived within minutes and distributed across the station's academic record within hours. Kelzer entered from the south tunnel to applause. Ceremonial gear this morning. Polished kitten plates from shoulder to mid-thigh, each edge slightly brightened with the formal treatment he used for championship bouts. His throat markings ran deep, confident gold, steady and unflickering, the specific color of a creature who has not considered the possibility of a different outcome. He acknowledged the room with a broad, deliberate gesture, mandibles spread in the Seathani expression that meant something between welcome and certainty. He was enjoying this. He stood at the center of the floor, let the sound settle, and called for a volunteer. Silence. Students looked at their hands, their neighbors, the floor. No one moved. The silence had the quality of a room where everyone knows the correct answer and no one wants to be the one who gives it. Kira stood. She came down from the upper section, 3rd row from the top, moving at the unhurried pace she brought to everything. She was wearing the standard training issue, thin fabric in the academy's neutral gray, no armor panels, no reinforcement, no protection at all. Against the amphitheater's scale, she was small. Against Kelzer, she was very small. Her footsteps made no sound on the arena floor. A conquered official said quietly to his colleague, not quietly enough, "This will be brief." Kelzer looked at her when she stopped 4 meters away. He looked down the distance between them with the specific gaze of a creature assessing something that has arrived on the wrong side of a significant size differential. He clicked his mandibles once. "Brave," he said, "foolish, but brave." He said it warmly, the way a teacher says something to a student who has made an endearing mistake. The applause that followed had that quality, warm, anticipatory, the sound of an audience prepared to witness something it already knows the shape of. Kira looked up at him. She did not say anything. The referee stepped forward, raised a hand, and dropped it. Kelzer's opening was the right side lunge, 2 massive strides closing the distance at speed, leading with his armored shoulder, the angle dropping toward her center mass. He had used that opening in 23 recorded matches. It had connected in 23 recorded matches. She had watched all 23 on the Academy's archived footage, the kind of footage that is accessible with a guest library permit and patience. She was not there. She had moved left, low, fast, below chest height, below the 0.3-second tracking threshold his biology required. His shoulder hit the air where she had been. He turned, recalibrated, the motion fluid and practiced, and struck to the right. She was not there either. The crowd went quiet. Not the silence of disappointment, the silence of recalibration. 300 students who came to watch something expected leaning forward in unison as the thing they expected failed to happen. She did not fight him, she moved. Low lateral shifts, sudden direction changes, appearing at his left side, circling to his back, vanishing from where his eyes tracked and appearing somewhere else. She stayed just outside his reach and just inside his frustration. He swung, he missed, he turned. She was already elsewhere. His markings shifted from gold to a deep orange, the color of something working hard. 3 minutes. 5. 7. The galaxy's most decorated active combat instructor could not touch a 17-year-old girl in a training uniform. She was not attacking, she was reading. Every strike he threw was data, confirming what the recordings had shown or adding a detail the recordings had missed. His weight transfer before the left arm swing, the slight lag in his right knee at the end of a lunge sequence, the way his mandibles pressed tight when he was about to commit to a direction. 6 weeks of anatomy texts and archived footage confirmed in real time. At the 10-minute mark, the temperature was working. It was not dramatic. It would not appear on any recording as a visible change. But Cthani joints below 18 degrees begin losing lateral flexibility in the thoracic strike assembly, and they had been in this room for 11 minutes, and the room was 16 degrees, and his movements were carrying a weight they had not carried at minute 3. Not heavy, heavier. The difference between a weapon operating at full capacity and one that has been asked to do something in conditions it was not optimized for. He was still dangerous. He was built to be dangerous, and he had spent his whole life refining it, but he was made for short, overwhelming force applied quickly. He was not made for a fight that would not end against an opponent who simply refused to be where she was supposed to be. At 12 minutes, Kira struck. It was not loud. It was not visible from the upper gallery as anything other than a quick shift in angle. An open palm strike to the gap between his third and fourth thoracic plates, precisely placed, with exactly enough force to reach the nerve cluster beneath the kitten's thinnest point. Not a blow intended to damage. A signal, a statement of knowledge. He flinched, left side involuntary, a small spasm that traveled from the contact point up through his shoulder. The crowd saw it. The crowd had not made a sound in 4 minutes, and now it made one, not a cheer, not a gasp, something smaller and sharper than either. She struck again. 7th plate, different angle, same precision. His left leg buckled for a fraction of a second, caught itself, held. She had shown him she knew where to go. She had shown the amphitheater she knew where to go. She had shown the cameras, the monitoring officers, the conquered officials, the holographic archive that would distribute within hours. She had shown all of it. Kelzer roared. Deep and resonant, the sound his species makes when something primal overrides training, the vocalization of a creature whose body has decided that strategy has failed and something older needs to run the next few seconds. He swung, wide, fast, without technique, pure mass and momentum, the kind of strike that ends things when it connects. She stepped inside it. The hook she put behind his leading ankle was the simplest technique in the human repertoire. Children learn it in schoolyard fights. It works because it does not try to oppose mass. It redirects it. His own forward momentum continued past the point where his foot was, and the geometry of that, mass committed to a direction, support removed from underneath, did the rest. He fell. The impact traveled through the amphitheater floor and up through the seats and into the bodies of 3,000 people in the same instant. Dust rose from the arena floor. Somewhere in the upper gallery, a data pad hit the ground and no one moved to pick it up. She was on him before he had processed the fall, one hand at the jaw nerve junction, not gripping, pressing, the specific contact point that locks SciFi voluntary motion when held at the correct angle. One hand bracing his thoracic plate, her weight distributed to use leverage rather than force. She was not strong enough to hold him by strength. She did not need to be. The joint architecture did it. The nerve junction did it. 6 weeks of xenobiology texts did it. His throat markings ran through colors in fractures, red, white, purple, black, cycling through them fast, out of sequence, the involuntary distress signal of a body that cannot produce a controlled response. No one in the amphitheater had ever seen those colors on him. Some of them had not known he could make those colors. She leaned close. She spoke. Only he heard it. Outpost Meridian 7, Commander Elena Vasquez. She held the eastern wall for 7 hours. She killed 39 of your soldiers before she fell. She was my mother. She did not break easily, and neither did I. She released him. She stood. She stepped back. Kelza lay on the arena floor. His throat markings dimmed, cycling down through the distress colors until they reached a faint, trembling gray, the SciFi color of surrender. He did not rise. 3 seconds. The universe held the shape of those 3 seconds. Dorvac stood. He was in the third row, beside 2 Gorith who had been watching in complete silence for the last 7 minutes, and when he stood, he brought his hands together with a sound like the closing of something enormous. His face was entirely still. His eyes were wet. Beside him, Selith rose. Her bioluminescent patches blazed white, every one of them, simultaneously, at full intensity, the light visible from the upper gallery. She did not try to control them. She let them burn. Row by row, in a wave that moved from Dorvac's position outward and up, the amphitheater rose. In the dignitary section, one conquered official had not moved. He was looking at his data pad, the old record, the old classification. His hand moved to the delete field. He typed a new entry. He typed it slowly, with the specific deliberateness of someone who understands they are writing something that will be cited later. Humanity, Threat Reassessment, Priority Alpha. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the arena floor, where a 17-year-old girl from Sao Paulo was standing alone in a training uniform, and the most decorated combat instructor in the Academy's active roster was gray and still on the ground beneath her feet, and the whole visible galaxy was on its feet around them both. He saved the entry. The footage left the station before anyone thought to stop it. A student in the upper gallery had been recording on a personal device, not for broadcast, just for the habit of keeping things, and uploaded it to the shared academic network before the arena had fully emptied. By the time the communications office identified the file and began the process of deciding whether it required review, it had already been copied 47 times. By the time the review was complete, it had moved beyond the station's network entirely. Within 6 hours, it was on every major relay node in the conquered territories. Within a day, military analysts from 12 species had published formal breakdowns. The footage ran in segments, annotated with slow-motion overlays of her footwork, the angle of the nerve strikes, the precise moment his left leg buckled, and he committed his weight to a direction she was not going to be in. A retired Gorith general, 4 decades of service, 3 campaigns, the kind of credentials that make other people's credentials feel decorative, called it the most sophisticated application of species-specific tactical exploitation he had seen in 40 years of active study. He said it in a public brief. He said it without hesitation. A Vanni combat theorist named Perth published a paper. The title was plain, Endurance as Weapon, the Human Paradigm. It was the most downloaded academic paper of the quarter, by a significant margin. On Earth, the footage played on every screen. In the frontier colonies, the ones that had lived under the shadow of Seathani expansion for over a decade, the ones where people had learned to measure safety in distance and silence, and the direction the ships were heading, settlers watched a girl from Sao Paulo stand over the fallen body of their enemy's most decorated instructor, and they felt something they had not let themselves feel in a very long time. Kira did not feel proud. She felt tired in the specific way that comes after something that has cost exactly what you knew it would cost, and the paying is over, and what is left is the quiet on the other side of it. She declined every interview, attended the mandatory official meetings, gave the required statements in as few words as possible, returned to her studies. She went back to her corner table in the dining hall, the one where she could see both exits and the main corridor. Some habits are not about caution. Some habits are just what you are. Kelzer was stripped of his teaching position on day 4. It was not primarily about the demonstration. The demonstration had shown what she was, but what got Kelzer removed was what she had said in the corridor that morning, the name of Outpost Shy, the phrase before the conquest terms were filed, and what the Academy's legal division found when they pulled his classroom records. Years of war stories, told proudly to hundreds of students. The specific story about the medical personnel at Shy. The dates, the details, the way he had described it as efficient, all of it on the Academy's own recording system, archived and time-stamped. He had never imagined anyone would care. He had told it because he was proud of it, and pride does not make good threat assessments. He was confined to quarters pending tribunal on day 5. His classroom war stories were now evidence. No killing, not killing in return, Selith corrected herself in her own thinking, his files being opened, his record being read by people who were reading it for the first time with intent. The architecture of what he had done, which had always been there, now lit from a different angle. 3 nights after the demonstration, Selith was sitting on her pod, pretending to read when she saw it. Kira's hands. She was at the corner desk, data pad open to something that did not require the expression she was wearing, and her hands were not still. They were pressed flat against the surface. She was pressing them flat because they were shaking, and she had decided the flat surface would solve the shaking, and it was almost working. Selith put her own pad down. "You do not have to be strong right now," she said. "Not in here, not with me." Kira did not answer immediately. She looked at her hands on the desk. "I was afraid," she said. Her voice was even. It was even in the specific way that things are even when they are being held even from the inside, which is the most expensive kind of even. "I was afraid I would fail her, that I would stand where she stood and fall the same way, that I would prove them right, that we are soft, that we break." She stopped. She held for 7 hours, 32 people behind her. She bought the time and paid what it cost. Her hands pressed flatter. "I needed it to mean something. I needed there to be a record that said what she did was not a rest stop. I was afraid I was going to get here and not be enough to make that record." Selith crossed the room. She sat beside her. She put all 4 arms around her, and the angles were wrong, the same as always, and Kira leaned in. 1 breath, 2. 1 tear wiped away quickly, almost angrily, as if it had broken ranks without permission. "You did not fail her," Selith said. Kira was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the shelf, the photo dark now, the projector off, the worn leather bracelet she had taken off and set beside it. "She repaired that bracelet herself," she said, 3 times, different thread each time because she used what she had. She wore it every day for 12 years until she went to the Eastern Wall. She looked at it. I took it the day I left. I thought if I wore it, she would be there. Selith did not say anything. She held on. She was, Kira said quietly, not to Selith, to the shelf. The following evening, Dorvax filled the doorway. He carried a small stone, dark grey, smooth-edged, the kind that has been in water for a long time. A single word was carved in careful, angular script on its face, the Gorith character that meant endure, not survive, not persist, the specific word that meant continuing to be yourself under pressure, the thing that does not break its shape. His people gave memory stones to those they considered family. Selith knew this from a cultural context module. What the module had not covered was what it looked like in practice. A very large creature in a doorway, holding a small stone in both hands with the focused deliberateness of someone carrying something that matters. He held it out. Kira took it. It was warm from his hands. She looked at the carved character for a long time, then she looked at him. For the first time since she had arrived on Valith 9, she smiled, small, tired, real. "Thank you," she said. 2 words, not one, which was the most emotion anyone had heard in her voice. Dorvac nodded. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Earth was upgraded to full Concord membership within 2 weeks. The vote was unanimous, which was not something the Concord Council had managed on anything in 11 years. The single student academic limit was lifted by the same vote, by the same margin, in the same session. 14 humans arrived the following semester. They came from every continent, from cities and farms and coastlines and thin air places, from the kinds of backgrounds that the Academy's old intake form had no category for. They walked through the docking bay with their heads up and their eyes open. Not a single student moved to block their path. Not a single corridor fell quiet when they entered it. The students who had been in the amphitheater that day moved aside, and the students who had heard about it from others moved aside too, and the ones who had only read the paper Perth wrote found themselves stepping back without entirely knowing why. Kira met them at the registration desk. She did not give a speech. She had a stack of data cards prepared, dormitory, schedule, the station map with the key distances already marked. She handed one to each of them. "Welcome," she said. "You are going to do well here." One of them, a boy from Lagos with bright eyes and hands that were doing the thing hands do when they are not sure where to be, said, "Are you Kira Vasquez, the one from the video?" She said, "I am Kira. The rest does not matter." He nodded. He looked at the data card in his hands. He looked up. "Thank you," he said. She said, "Work hard." She handed the next card to the person behind him and moved on. In a small holding room near the transport docks, Kelza sat alone. The ceremonial gear was gone. The rank insignia had been removed from his collar. The fabric showed the small shadows where the pins had been, pale patches against the dark. His throat markings, which had run gold every day for 9 consecutive years, held a dull and steady grey that had not changed in 4 days. A young Seathani officer entered with transport documents. He hesitated at the door in the way the young hesitate when they are uncertain whether they are allowed to ask something. He asked, "What was it like," he said, "fighting the human?" Kelza looked at him for a long time. "I have fought across 12 systems," he said. "I have faced soldiers from 9 species. I have been wounded, outnumbered, outgunned. I have faced death more times than I can name." His markings did not shift. They stayed grey. "I have never lost a match. In 30 years of fighting, I have never been on the ground." The young officer was quiet. "She did not fight me," Kelza said. "I thought she was reacting. I thought she was defending, surviving, buying time. She was not doing any of those things." He looked at the viewport, the transport dock lights moving outside, steady and mechanical. "She was hunting me. From the first day she walked into my classroom, she was hunting me, and I did not know it until I was already on the ground." The young officer frowned. "How long had she?" 6 weeks, Kelza said. "She had 6 weeks in my classroom and she used all of them." He was quiet. "She could have moved in the 3rd week. I know that now. She knew enough by then. She waited until the amphitheater was full and the cameras were running and the record was open. His markings stayed grey, entirely grey. She did not want to beat me. She wanted it permanent. The young officer looked at the documents in his hands. "Do not underestimate humans," Kelzer said. He said it without heat, without bitterness, with the flat authority of a thing that has become simply true. "They are not what we thought. They are not what anyone thought." The young officer left. Kelzer did not move. He watched the lights through the viewport for a long time. The last night before the new semester began, the dormitory was quiet. Selith was asleep, her patches cycling through their soft resting pulse, a dim rhythmic blue that lit the nearest wall in slow intervals. Outside the viewport, Valith 9 turned against the dark in its slow, indifferent arc, and beyond it, the stars sat where they had always sat, holding no opinion about any of this. Kira was at the shelf. She set the memory stone beside the holographic projector, pressed the activation point. The photo came up. Commander Elena Vasquez, woman in armor, tired smile, alive. Slightly off-center, the light catching one side of her face. The photo that Selith had seen and decided not to ask about 6 months ago before she understood what the not asking cost and what it eventually gave her. The leather bracelet was on the shelf beside the stone. Repaired in 3 places, 3 colors of thread, worn for 12 years, and then given to someone who needed it to carry someone across a very long distance. Kira looked at the photo. "We are here, Mom," she said, "and we are not going anywhere." She turned off the data pad. She lay down. Outside, the station turned. Inside, Selith's patches kept their slow blue rhythm in the dark, and on the shelf, the stone and the photo sat side by side, the thing that endurance costs and the thing it builds, together on a small shelf in the lowest dormitory wing on a station at the edge of the conquered galaxy. The galaxy had a word for what Earth produced. It had been using the wrong one.